Senator Bernardi.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. It's extraordinary coming into this debate, I have to say, because you get words like hate speech, bigots, racist. I mean, most of them have been directed at me over the last 2 or 3 years, and I've had to deal with them. And the point that I make is that these words are an excuse for not actually debating a substantive topic. And I have to say there is a modicum of hypocrisy coming from some of those opposite, who talk about not referring to hate speech or how not protecting the rights of bigots, and somehow we're oppressing minorities and only allowing the majority to have this unfettered freedom of speech. I reject that in its entirety, just as I reject the terms bigots and racists and any other sort of epithets that they want to throw at us, and slurs. What I do support, though, is what Senator Di Natale said. It might surprise you, Mr Acting Deputy President. He said, it's very easy to jump on a bandwagon when it's convenient, but it's very tough to stick to principle when it seems that people are opposed to you or it's an unpopular principle. I'm quite proud of the fact that I've stuck to principle at every turn of the word here. I have called out the hate preachers for many, many years in this place. I have called them out when they've been out there talking about uncovered meat and raping, justifying the rape of young Australian women. I've called them out when some South Australian sheikh said, "Oh Allah, count the Buddhists and the Hindus one by one. Oh Allah, count them and kill them to the very last one." I consider that unacceptable. Unacceptable to be advocating for violence against someone on the basis of their religion. But what I don't consider unacceptable is the fact that you're able to be critical of someone. You're able to say something that someone else may find offensive or insulting, because that is a subjective term. And why are we subjecting ourselves to this plenary sort of arbitrary decision that someone, I'm offended by what you've got to say? Because the offence is quite often conjured up just to stop someone from saying something that they don't want to hear. And that's what's happened in the debate about the hate preachers in some of the mosques. That's what's happened in some of the debate when you want to tackle some of the extremists that are taking up in this country. That's what happens when you call it out and say we are wasting money by throwing it into circumstances where people are not lifting themselves out of poverty or making a better contribution to society. You get called a racist or a bigot, or someone's taken offence. When someone like Andrew Bolt, who I'm proud to call a friend, says that there are people gaming the system, he's taken to court over it and he's found guilty because someone took offence. That is absolutely wrong. And I stood with the attorney when he put forward his changes to 18C. I thought they went a bit far, I have to tell you that, but it was a starting point for negotiation. It was a starting point for community discussion. But it was bogged down, it was drowned in these accusations of bigotry and racism. I reject that in its entirety. And that's why when the government decided not to pursue it, because of the vocal minority that up in arms about it, those in the Twitter sphere and elsewhere, I joined with Senator Dean Smith, Senator Layenhelm and Senator Bob Day in sponsoring a very simple repeal of 2 words of Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, and that is to remove the provisions of insult and offend. Insult and offend. And somehow that's racism. Somehow saying I don't want insult and offend in that, I'm a bigot. That's simply not true. And it's not true because it's brought a cross-section of support. A cross-section of support. We've had people like Paul Howes say that's a reasonable change to it. We've had people like Julian Burnside, QC, those noted right-wingers there. Julian Burnside has said that seems reasonable. We've had Greg Barnes, who's been a candidate for every political party in the country, I think. He's come out and said, yeah, that's okay. We've had a whole range of people across the political spectrum say this is a reasonable and sensible amendment to Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. But we won't hear that from those who are interested in perpetuating this cult of victimhood, this sense that somehow because someone says something you don't like and you find offensive, that somehow you should be able to take them to a tribunal. This is a failing, and it is a failing of debate in this country. The fact that we cannot stand up and have an honest discussion and a straightforward discussion without the sorts of slurs that have been put forward in this chamber and put forward out there in the public domain. What passes for debate in this country and what passes for media reporting in this country is more often than not some outraged lefty on Twitter that been quoted by the media and say, look how upset Cory Bernardi's made everyone today, because there's some anonymous desk jockey filing 140 characters of smear and abuse. That is not meaningful debate about in the long-term interests of the country. If we cannot have serious conversations about the issues that are impacting us, that risk offending people, they risk offending people, and we're somewhat protected from it in this place, let me tell you, Mr. Acting Deputy President, because we have this thing called parliamentary privilege, where we can say basically what we like, we wear the wrath of it in the public sphere, but we can't be taken to court over it. And we have to use that judiciously, we have to use it appropriately. Sometimes we get it right and sometimes we get it wrong. But we know we're never going to front up to court over it. But the point I make is this: the rest of the country doesn't have that same privilege. If someone makes a comment that simply upsets someone because they've annoyed them, or they've pestered them, or they've somehow made them feel uncomfortable, they can find themselves before some quasi-tribunal. And this is absolutely wrong. It's devoid of common sense. Now, I do not agree that we should have unfettered free speech, because then we would have people like this Sheikh Sharif Hussein in South Australia, who was praying to God that all the Hindus and Buddhists would be killed. I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong to be preaching that sort of stuff out there. But we should be countering it in the court of public opinion. But unfortunately we're not able to. We're not able to, because when you pick up this and you write to them and you say, what are you doing? You get called a racist or a bigot or some other slur. And that's what's fundamentally wrong. We cannot call out the hate preachers where it is. When we're talking about hate, many times it's in the eye of the beholder. And if we want to look at the hypocrisy in this, it was only recently, in recent years, the Greens decided the Murdoch press was somehow the hate press, and were preaching hatred against the Greens, and they wanted to enact some sort of government mechanism to limit the freedom of the press. Now, I find that anathema. We have opportunities, if you're maligned by the press, to pursue it through the courts as anyone else would for defamation, but not simply because you're upset or somehow offended by what they've got to say. And this is the hypocrisy that we're seeing in this chamber today. If we want to have a serious debate, let's have a discussion without the slurs. Let's have a discussion without the epithets. Let's have a discussion about what's in the national interest.
Thank you, Senator.